I never told my boy what I really did over there. That's on me, I suppose. Some men came home and talked. They wrote books, gave speeches, wore their service on their sleeve every chance they got. I wasn't one of them. I came back in '72, bought this ranch house on Austin Bluffs Parkway with my VA loan, and got quiet, real quiet. My name is Thomas Riley. Friends call me Tom. I'm 78 years old, and I still live in that same house here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. The carpet's worn thin in the hallway. The kitchen faucet drips no matter how many washers I replace. But it's mine, paid off decades ago, and I know every creak in the floorboards. I became a father late, 44 years old when Daniel was born. His mother and I met at a church social in '81. She was younger, patient, the kind of woman who didn't mind that I didn't talk much about the past. We had a good decade together before the cancer took her. Daniel was only 9 when she died, so it's been just the two of us for a long time. But there's always been a canyon between us, not just the years, though God knows 34 years is a gap, but something else, a difference in how we see the world. He grew up in the '80s and '90s, safe, comfortable, never wanting for much. I grew up in the '40s and '50s, when you kept your head down and did what needed doing. Before you go, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you're watching from the States, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I'm curious who's listening to an old man's story at this hour. And subscribe if you want to hear how this ends, because it gets interesting. Daniel's about to be promoted to Major, United States Air Force, logistics officer, works at Peterson Space Force Base, just a few miles from this house. I'm proud of him. I am. He's smart, organized, good at what he does, but he's never seen combat, never had to make the kind of decisions that stay with you 50 years later. A few weeks back, he called me from the base, said the ceremony was coming up, that I was invited, that it would mean a lot if I came. Then he laughed, not cruel, but dismissive, and said something that's been sitting in my chest like a stone ever since. Dad, nobody believes those old war stories anymore. Times have changed. I didn't argue, never do, but I set the phone down and looked at the cigar box on my coffee table. Cedar, beat up, held together with duct tape on one corner. Inside it were things I hadn't touched in months, things I earned when I was younger than Daniel is now. He thinks I made it all up, because I stayed silent all these years. My own son thinks his father is a liar. 3 days before the ceremony, Daniel came by the house. He didn't call ahead, just knocked twice, and let himself in with the key I gave him years ago. I was in the living room, sitting in my recliner with the cigar box open on the coffee table. I'd been cleaning the metals inside with a soft cloth, nothing fancy, just wiping away the dust and tarnish that builds up when you don't look at something for too long. Bronze star, purple heart, a couple of others I don't talk about much. Daniel came around the corner carrying a folder of paperwork, probably something related to the ceremony. He saw the box and stopped. His face did that thing it does when he's annoyed but trying not to show it. A little tightness around the mouth, a sigh that comes out through the nose. Dad, he said, setting the folder on the counter. What are you doing? Cleaning, I said. Simple as that. He walked over and looked down at the metals spread out on the table. There weren't many, just enough to fill a small cigar box. He shook his head, slow, like he was disappointed in me. Where did you even get these? I looked up at him. You know where I got them. Dad, he rubbed his temple. I've told you, nobody buys this stuff anymore. You can order metals online for $15. Everybody knows that. I didn't answer. I've learned over the years that sometimes silence is the only response that doesn't make things worse. He glanced toward the front window. Look, some of the guys from the base might stop by this week. Junior officers, a couple of the admin staff. I don't want them seeing this flea market junk sitting out. It's embarrassing. That word hit harder than I expected. Embarrassing. My son thought the proof of what I'd done, what I'd survived, was an embarrassment. Before I could say anything, Daniel picked up the cigar box. He closed the lid, tucked it under his arm, and walked toward the door that leads to the garage. I stood up, started to say something, but he was already through the doorway. I followed him. I watched him open the side door to the garage, flip on the light, and scan the shelves. He found a spot on the top shelf, behind some old paint cans and a box of Christmas lights I haven't used in a decade. He shoved the cigar box back there, out of sight, and turned around. "There," he said. "Better." I just stood there, too stunned to speak. He walked past me, grabbed his folder off the counter, and headed for the front door. "I'll see you Friday, Dad. The ceremony starts at 11. Just wear a suit, okay? Something normal." Then he was gone. I stood in the garage for a long time after that, staring at the shelf, at the paint cans and the Christmas lights, and the little cedar box hidden behind them, like it was something shameful. He didn't just doubt my service, he hid the evidence of it. 2 days before the ceremony, Daniel called again. It was late afternoon. I was out back, watering the tomato plants I've been trying to keep alive all summer. The phone rang inside, and by the time I got to it, I'd missed the first call. He rang again a minute later. "Hey, Dad," he said when I picked up. His tone was lighter than it had been at the house, almost cheerful. "Just wanted to confirm, you're still coming. Friday, right?" "I'll be there," I said. Good. There was a pause, then he cleared his throat. "Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. The officer presiding over the ceremony is a big deal. Major General Raymond Hatcher. He's a legend in the Air Force. Flew combat missions, commanded entire wings, the whole deal. This is a huge honor." I didn't recognize the name, but I didn't say so. "Just keep that in mind, okay?" Daniel continued. "The general's going to be right there on the stage. He's serious, professional. This isn't some casual backyard cookout." "I understand," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "Dad, I need you to promise me something." His voice dropped, got quieter. "Please don't bring up the old stories, the hero stuff, the medals, any of it. I know you mean well, but it doesn't come off the way you think it does. People don't believe it, and it just makes things awkward." I stood there holding the phone, looking out the kitchen window at the mountains in the distance, the same mountains I've looked at for 50 years. "I don't want you to embarrass yourself," he said, "especially not in front of General Hatcher. The man's a living legend. He's seen real combat, real sacrifice. He'll know if someone's exaggerating." There it was, exaggerating. He didn't say liar outright, but the word hung there anyway. "Just wear a suit," Daniel said. "Be respectful, and let me have my moment, okay? This promotion means everything to me. I'll be there," I said again. My voice was steady, but my hand was shaking. "Thanks, Dad. Love you." He hung up. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a long time. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. My son had just told me not to embarrass him in front of a hero, a man he respected, a man he admired, a legend. And it hit me then, really hit me, that Daniel respected a stranger more than he respected his own father, that he believed this general's stories, but not mine, that he'd rather hide my medals in the garage than risk someone seeing them. I walked to the garage, pulled the cord for the overhead light, looked up at the top shelf where the cigar box was hidden, and something shifted inside me. I don't get angry much, not anymore. The years teach you that anger burns hot and fast and doesn't solve much, but standing there in that garage, looking at the evidence of my service shoved behind paint cans like trash, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. He told me not to embarrass him in front of a hero, never knowing who taught that hero how to survive. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, thinking about Daniel's voice on the phone, thinking about the way he'd said exaggerating, the way he'd hidden the box, the way he'd looked at me like I was a confused old man clinging to stories that never happened. At 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep. I got out of bed, pulled on my robe, and walked through the dark house to the garage. The concrete floor was cold under my bare feet. I flipped on the light and stood there for a moment, looking at the shelves. Then I pulled over the stepladder. It took me longer than it should have to climb up. My knees don't bend like they used to, and my balance isn't what it was. But I got up there, moved the paint cans aside, and pulled down the cigar box. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table, opened the lid. I looked at the medals inside. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Silver Star, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. A few ribbons and commendations I barely remember earning. I sat there for a while, just looking at them, remembering. Then I stood up and walked to the hall closet. In the back, behind winter coats I haven't worn in years, there's a garment bag, black vinyl, zippered, hanging from a wooden hanger. I pulled it down and carried it to the bedroom. I laid it on the bed. Unzip it. Inside was my Marine Corps dress blue uniform. I hadn't seen it in decades. The wool was still dark, the gold buttons still bright, the service stripes on the left sleeve, 4 of them, 1 for every 4 years of service. The ribbons I'd added before I hung it up for the last time in 1972. I pulled the jacket out first. It smelled faintly of cedar and old closets. The fabric was heavier than I remembered. I held it up, looked at it in the dim light from the bedside lamp. Then I tried to put it on. It didn't go easy. The shoulders were tight. The wool fought me as I shoved my arms through the sleeves. I got it over my back, tried to pull the front closed, and realized immediately that 50 years and 30 pounds don't fit the same way 28 years and 160 pounds did. The buttons didn't want to close. I had to suck in my gut, really suck it in, and pull hard to get the first button through the hole, then the second. By the third, I was sweating. The fabric stretched across my chest and belly like it was holding on for dear life. I stood in front of the mirror on the closet door. The man looking back at me was old, gray hair, deep lines around the eyes, a gut that no amount of sucking in could completely hide. The jacket pulled tight in places it shouldn't. The waist button looked like it might pop off if I breathed too hard. But under all that, under the age and the weight and the years, the uniform was still there. The uniform was still mine. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, looked myself in the eye. The soldier reappeared. I pulled the trousers out next. They fit better than the jacket, but just barely. I had to leave the top button undone and hope the jacket would cover it. I found the belt, threaded it through the loops, cinched it tight. Then I went back to the kitchen and got the cigar box. I brought it to the bedroom and laid the medals out on the bed. One by one, I pinned them to the jacket in the proper order. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. It took me an hour to get everything right. The medals, the ribbons, the brass is polished with an old rag, the cover, the cap, brushed clean and set on the dresser. When I was done, I stood in front of the mirror again. The uniform was 2 sizes too small and 50 years too old. But the pride, that fit just fine. I made coffee at 5 in the morning, same as I do every day. But that morning, standing at the kitchen counter waiting for the pot to finish brewing, I wasn't thinking about the ceremony. I was thinking about Hill 937, Hamburger Hill, they called it later, May 1969, A Shau Valley. 56 years ago, but I can still smell it. Mud and gunpowder and something worse, something you never forget no matter how hard you try. I was a sergeant then. I'm 22 years old, leading a fire team up a slope that didn't want to be climbed. The North Vietnamese had dug in at the top, and we'd been ordered to take it. Simple orders. Impossible execution. We'd been fighting for days. The rain never stopped. The mud sucked at your boots with every step. You couldn't see 10 feet in front of you half the time because of the jungle canopy and the smoke from the mortars. On the 3rd day, our platoon leader, Lieutenant Raymond Hatcher, fresh out of officer candidate school, barely 23 years old, took shrapnel in the leg and shoulder. We were pinned down halfway up the hill, automatic fire coming from 3 directions. The LT went down hard, and the corpsman couldn't get to him. I didn't think about it, didn't have time to think. I crawled through the mud to where he'd fallen. He was conscious, bleeding bad, trying to give orders through gritted teeth. I told him to shut up and save his strength. Then I got him over my shoulder and started moving. 3 miles back to the fire base. That's what they told me later. I don't remember all of it. I remember the weight. I remember my legs screaming. I remember thinking I was going to die with every step. But if I stopped, the LT definitely would. I remember his blood soaking through my uniform. I remember him saying, "Leave me, Sergeant, that's an order." I remember telling him officers don't know shit about anything. We made it. Both of us. He got medevaced out. I went back up the hill 2 days later with what was left of my platoon. We took it on the 11th try. 63 men died taking that hill. I carried one of them to safety, and for that, they gave me a Silver Star. I didn't earn that medal for being brave. I earned it because I was too stubborn to let the LT die. I poured my coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. The uniform was hanging in the bedroom. The medals were laid out on the dresser, and in a few hours, I was going to see the LT again. I wondered if he'd remember me. Daniel had a hero growing up. Not me. Never me. General Marcus J. Hargrove. I didn't realize it at first. When Daniel was young, 12, 13, 14, he went through phases like all kids do. Baseball cards one year, model airplanes the next. But when he got interested in the military, around 15 or 16, one name kept coming up. Dad. Did you hear General Hargrove's speech at the Air Force Academy? It was incredible. Dad. General Hargrove wrote a book on leadership. I'm reading it for my ROTC class. Dad. Hargrove flew combat missions in Vietnam and then commanded entire operations in Desert Storm. The guy's a legend. I'd nod. Say something like, "That's good, son. Sounds like a smart man." I never told him I knew Hargrove. Never told him we served together. Never told him anything, because by then, I'd already decided that my war stories didn't belong in Daniel's clean, safe world. He was going to be an officer, college-educated, a leader. He didn't need his old man's mud and blood dragging him down. When Daniel graduated from the Air Force Academy, he had a poster in his dorm room. I saw it when I helped him move out. An official portrait, Lieutenant General Marcus J. Hargrove in full dress uniform, rows of ribbons on his chest, 4 stars on his shoulder. Daniel saw me looking at it. "That's who I want to be like, Dad," he said. "A man who actually did something, who earned his place." I just nodded. What could I say? My son had a poster of General Hargrove on his wall, and a hidden box of my medals in the garage. Over the years, Daniel quoted Hargrove constantly. Hargrove says leadership is about accountability. Hargrove wrote that a good officer listens more than he talks. Hargrove's doctrine on logistics saved lives in Iraq. Every time I'd listen, nod, stay quiet, and every time it hurts a little more. Not because I was jealous. I wasn't. Hargrove deserved the respect. He'd become everything a man should be. Strong, honorable, a leader worth following. But Daniel didn't see me that way. To him, I was just the old man who told exaggerated stories about a war nobody cared about anymore. The father who'd never done anything worth respecting. The embarrassment he had to hide from his colleagues. I finished my coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink. In a few hours, Daniel was going to stand on a stage and receive his promotion from the man he admired most in the world. And I was going to be there in a uniform 2 sizes too small, wearing medals my son thought I bought at a flea market. The irony didn't just hurt, it burned. I pulled up the ceremony details on my computer around 7 that morning. I'm not great with technology, but Daniel had emailed me a link to the base website a few days earlier. I clicked through the pages until I found the schedule. Peterson Space Force Base Officer Promotion Ceremony, Friday, 11 a.m., Building 1, Main Auditorium. Presiding Officer, Lieutenant General Marcus J. Hargrove, USAF, RETI. I stared at the screen for a long time. Marcus J. Hargrove, the LT. I'd known it was him when Daniel mentioned the name on the phone, but seeing it written out, official, formal, made it real in a way I hadn't quite processed yet. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Raymond Hatcher. That's what I knew him as. That's what we all called him. LT, or Hatcher, when we weren't under fire. I didn't know his middle name. Didn't know he'd later change how he went by his name. Didn't know he'd rise through the ranks to become one of the most respected leaders in the Air Force. I just knew he was a good man who didn't deserve to die in the mud on some godforsaken hill in Vietnam. My hands were shaking, not from nerves, from something else. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or just the weight of 56 years suddenly becoming lighter. I printed the page. I folded it, set it on the kitchen table next to my keys. Then I went to the bedroom and looked at the uniform hanging on the back of the door. This wasn't about showing off anymore. Wasn't about proving Daniel wrong or making him feel foolish. It wasn't even about the medals, really. This was about reuniting with a brother, a man I'd carried 3 miles through hell, a man who'd probably spent the last 5 decades wondering if the sergeant who saved him was still alive, a man who might not even remember my name, but would sure as hell remember my face. I didn't know what was going to happen when I walked into that auditorium. Didn't know if Hargrove would recognize me. Didn't know how Daniel would react. Didn't know if I'd even make it through the ceremony without the jacket buttons popping off. But I knew one thing. The man I carried through the jungle in 1969 was about to pin a major's leaf on my son, and I was going to be there to see it. I should have slept. The ceremony was at 11. I had hours to kill, but sleep wasn't coming, so I got up around midnight and went back to the bedroom. The uniform was hanging where I'd left it. The medals were still pinned to the jacket, but when I looked closer in the lamplight, I could see smudges on the brass, fingerprints, tarnish I'd missed earlier. That wouldn't do. I took the jacket off the hanger and carried it to the kitchen, laid it flat on the table under the overhead light. Then I went to the closet in the hallway and dug around until I found the old tin of Brasso I keep for the doorknobs. I sat down at the table with a soft rag and started working. The bronze star came off first. I polished the brass until I could see my reflection in it, rubbed the ribbon until the fabric looked new again. Then I pinned it back exactly where it belonged. Top row, centered, Purple Heart next. Same process. Polish, inspect, reattach. Silver Star, Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. The ribbons for the National Defense Service Medal, the Vietnam Service Medal, the Combat Action Ribbon. Each one got the same treatment. Slow, deliberate, the way I was taught in boot camp 58 years ago. While I worked, my mind wandered. I thought about the last time I'd worn this uniform, 1972, a retirement ceremony at Camp Pendleton, 16 years of service, 4 tours, more deployments than I could count. I shook hands with a colonel I barely knew, accepted a plaque I never hung on the wall, and walked out of the Marine Corps the same way I'd walked in, quietly, without much fanfare. I'd thought I was done with the uniform then, done with the military, done with all of it. I was wrong. The brass started to gleam under the light. I switched to the buttons on the jacket, 14 of them, stamped with the eagle, globe, and anchor. I polished each one until they burned gold. Then I checked the fit again. The jacket still pulled tight across the chest and belly, but I'd moved the waist button over slightly earlier in the day, giving myself another half-inch of breathing room. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't comfortable, but it would hold. I tried on the trousers, the cover, the belt with the brass buckle I'd polished until my fingers ached. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself. The man staring back was old. No getting around that. The uniform showed every pound I'd gained since 1972. The fabric stretched in places it shouldn't. The waist was tight enough that sitting down was going to be uncomfortable. But the medals were perfect. The brass was flawless. And the uniform, tight as it was, still fit the way it was supposed to. I adjusted the cover one last time. I made sure the eagle, globe, and anchor was centered exactly 1 inch above the bridge of my nose. Made sure the ribbons were aligned. Then I took it all off, hung it carefully on the back of the bedroom door, and set my alarm for 6 a.m. I wasn't doing this for Daniel anymore. I wasn't doing it to embarrass him or prove him wrong or get some kind of revenge for the way he'd treated me. I was doing this for the LT, for the man who'd told me to leave him behind and who I'd refused to obey, for the man who'd bled into my uniform while I carried him down a mountain in the rain, for the man who'd earned every star on his shoulder and who deserved to know the sergeant who saved him was still here, still standing, still a Marine. I pulled into the Peterson Space Force Base visitor lot at 10:30. The jacket was already uncomfortable. I'd been wearing it for 20 minutes, and the wool was starting to itch where it pressed against my neck. The waist button was holding, but barely. Every time I took a breath, I could feel the fabric strain. I sat in the truck for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, looking at the building ahead. Building 1. Main auditorium, a modern structure, all glass and steel, American flag out front snapping in the Colorado wind. I could still turn around, change into the suit hanging in the back seat, walk in like Daniel wanted, quiet, invisible, unremarkable. But I didn't. I got out of the truck, adjusted my cover, and started walking. The dress blues drew attention immediately. A young airman near the entrance saw me coming and straightened up, eyes going wide. An older NCO, maybe mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, stopped mid-conversation and stared, not at the uniform itself, but at the ribbons. I kept my head high. My walk was stiff, the trousers were tight, and my knees don't bend like they used to. But I moved with purpose. The ribbons caught the morning light, rows of color across my chest, bronze star with the V device for valor, silver star, purple heart, the Vietnamese cross of gallantry with the palm leaf. The older NCO nodded as I passed. A small gesture, respectful. I nodded back. Inside, the auditorium was filling up. Rows of chairs facing a raised stage. Air Force personnel in their service dress. Family members in business casual. A few civilians scattered throughout. I stepped through the door, and the murmur of conversation dipped for just a second. People noticed. A staff sergeant near the back row did a double take. A captain standing by the stage glanced over, saw the medals, and whispered something to the lieutenant next to him. And then I saw Daniel. He was near the front, talking to a group of officers. His peers, probably, the ones being promoted alongside him. He was smiling, relaxed, and confident. Then he looked toward the entrance and saw me. The smile vanished. His face went pale. Not embarrassed pale, horror pale. He said something to the officers around him, too quick for me to read his lips, and started walking toward me, fast, not quite running, but close. I stopped near the back row and waited. When he reached me, he grabbed my arm and pulled me to the side, away from the crowd. His voice was low, urgent, barely controlled. "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm here for your ceremony," I said. "I told you to wear a suit." His eyes darted to the jacket, the ribbons, the medals. "You look..." "Dad, that jacket doesn't even fit. It's bursting at the seams. People are staring. Let them stare." He glanced around, then leaned closer. "This is my promotion, my moment, and you show up dressed like you're trying to prove something." I looked him in the eye, calm, steady. "It fits the man inside it, son." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. His jaw tightened. "Just sit in the back, okay? Don't make a scene." He turned and walked back to the front before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, watching him rejoin his group, watching him force the smile back onto his face. Then I walked down the aisle and took a seat in the third row, right on the aisle, where everyone could see me. The auditorium filled quickly after that. I sat in my seat, hands folded in my lap, breathing shallow because deep breaths made the jacket pull too tight. The chair was hard plastic, standard military issue, and I could already feel the waistband of the trousers cutting into my gut, but I didn't move. People kept glancing at me as they walked past. Some nodded, some just stared. A few younger airmen, kids, really, barely 20, looked at the ribbons and then looked away quickly, like they weren't sure if they were supposed to acknowledge me or not. An older man, maybe 60, wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, stopped at the end of my row. He looked at the silver star, then at my face. "Semper Fi, Marine," he said quietly. "Semper Fi," I replied. He moved on. Daniel didn't look at me. He was sitting in the front row with the other officers being promoted, staring straight ahead, shoulders tense. I could feel the anger radiating off him from 3 rows back. At 10:55, a colonel stepped onto the stage and called the room to attention. Everyone stood. I stood too, slower than the rest, feeling every one of my 78 years in the way my knees creaked and my back protested. The colonel gave a short introduction. Thanks everyone for coming. Talked about the importance of leadership, the honor of promotion, the responsibility that comes with rank. I barely heard him. I was watching the side door near the stage, waiting. At exactly 11 o'clock, the door opened, and Lieutenant General Marcus J. Hargrove walked in. The room snapped to attention again, sharper this time, crisper. You could feel the respect in the air, thick and immediate. Hargrove was in his mid-70s now, but he moved like a man 20 years younger. Tall, straight-backed, shoulders squared. His uniform was immaculate. 4 stars on each shoulder, rows of ribbons that rivaled mine, silver hair cut high and tight. He walked to the center of the stage, stopped, and scanned the room. His eyes moved across the rows of airmen and officers and families, and then they stopped. On me. I saw the moment it happened, the flicker of recognition, the confusion, the narrowing of his eyes as he tried to place the face, then the shock. He didn't move for a second, just stared. The colonel next to him was still talking, going through the formalities, but Hargrove wasn't listening. He stepped off the stage. The room went silent. Hargrove walked down the center aisle, past the front row, past Daniel, past the other officers. He walked straight to my row and stopped. I stood. He looked at me, really looked at me, at the uniform that didn't quite fit, at the ribbons and medals, at the face he hadn't seen in 56 years. "Sarge?" His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Is that you?" I nodded. "Yes, sir." His face broke into something I can only describe as disbelief mixed with joy. He reached out, grabbed my hand, and shook it hard. "Tom Riley," he said louder now. "My God, I didn't know if you were still here, sir," I said. He didn't let go of my hand. He just stood there, shaking it, staring at me like I was a ghost. The entire auditorium was watching, including Daniel. Hargrove held my hand for what felt like a full minute. The room stayed silent. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody whispered. Finally, the colonel on stage cleared his throat, gentle, respectful, and Hargrove seemed to remember where he was. He released my hand, stepped back, and looked me up and down one more time. "Sarge," he said again, quieter, "you have no idea how many times I've thought about you." "I've thought about you too, sir," I said. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes, and then he turned and walked back to the stage. But before he took his place at the podium, he stopped and looked out at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the auditorium, "before we begin the promotion ceremony, I need to tell you something." He gestured toward me. The man sitting in the 3rd row, Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Riley, United States Marine Corps, retired, saved my life 56 years ago. The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. Hargrove continued. "May 1969, Hill 937, A Shao Valley. I was a 2nd lieutenant, fresh out of OCS, leading a platoon I had no business leading. We were pinned down halfway up that hill. I took shrapnel in the leg and shoulder. I couldn't walk, couldn't move." He paused, his eyes locked on mine. Sergeant Riley crawled through enemy fire to get to me. He put me on his shoulder and carried me 3 miles back to the fire base. 3 miles. Through mud, through jungle, under fire. I told him to leave me. He told me to shut up. A few people in the crowd laughed softly. Hargrove didn't. I spent 6 weeks in a field hospital, then 6 more months recovering stateside. By the time I got back to Vietnam, Sergeant Riley had rotated out. I never got to thank him properly. I didn't even know if he'd made it home. He looked at me again. But here he is, 78 years old, still standing tall, still wearing the uniform. He turned back to the crowd. "You see those ribbons on his chest? The bronze star with valor, the silver star, the purple heart. That's not flea market junk. That's not stolen valor. That's the real thing, earned in blood and mud and fire." I saw Daniel in the front row. He was staring at me, his face pale, his mouth slightly open. Hargrove wasn't finished. "I'm only alive to stand on this stage today because of Sergeant Riley, and I'm only here to promote these fine officers because he refused to leave me behind when every logical, rational thought said he should." He paused. "That's leadership. That's sacrifice. That's what we're supposed to be." The room stayed silent. Then, slowly, someone in the back started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole room. I stayed seated, hands folded. breathing shallow because the jacket was still too tight and my chest felt like it might burst for reasons that had nothing to do with the uniform. Hargrove waited for the applause to die down, then nodded once. "Now," he said, "let's promote some officers." The ceremony proceeded. One by one, the officers were called to the stage. Each one stood at attention while the colonel read their orders, and Hargrove pinned the new rank on their uniform. I watched, but I wasn't really seeing it. My mind was still caught on the moment Hargrove had said my name in front of all those people. Finally, the colonel called, "Captain Daniel Riley." Daniel stood and walked to the stage. His movements were stiff, mechanical. He stopped in front of Hargrove and saluted. Hargrove returned the salute, then held up the gold oak leaf, the rank of major. But before he pinned it on, he looked out at the crowd, at me. "Captain Riley," Hargrove said, his voice formal but warm. "Before I promote you, I want you to know something." Daniel didn't move. "Your father is the reason I'm standing here today, the reason I had a career, the reason I had a life. Without him, I would have died on a hill in Vietnam, and none of this," he gestured around the room, "would have happened." Daniel's jaw tightened. Hargrove pinned the oak leaf onto Daniel's uniform, then stepped back and extended his hand. Daniel shook it. "You come from good stock, Major Riley," Hargrove said. "Don't ever forget that." Daniel nodded. He couldn't seem to find words. Hargrove released his hand, and Daniel turned to walk off the stage. But as he passed me on the way back to his seat, he stopped. He looked at me, really looked at me, at the uniform, at the medals, at the man he'd told to wear a suit and sit in the back and not embarrass him. The arrogance was gone. So was the dismissiveness. What was left was something I hadn't seen in his eyes in a long time. Respect. He didn't say anything, just stood there for a moment, then nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, and sat down. I nodded back. The ceremony continued, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. I was looking at my son, and for the first time in years, I saw the man I'd hoped he'd become. The ceremony ended at 12:15. People stood, milled around, shook hands. The newly promoted officers were surrounded by family and friends offering congratulations. The room was filled with conversation and laughter. I stayed in my seat for a moment, letting the crowd thin out. My back was aching from sitting ramrod straight for over an hour. The jacket was soaked with sweat under the arms, but I didn't want to stand still, didn't want to face whatever was coming next. Then I saw Daniel walking toward me. He wasn't smiling. I wasn't crying either. Not yet. But his face was different. Open. Vulnerable, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. He stopped at the end of my row. "Dad," he said. I stood. Slowly. My knees protested. We looked at each other. Then Daniel stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. He held on tight, tighter than he had in years. His hands gripped the back of my jacket, and I felt his shoulders shake. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know, Dad. I'm so sorry." I put my hand on the back of his head, the way I used to when he was small. "It's okay, son." "No, it's not." His voice cracked. "I hid your medals. I told you not to talk about your service. I called you. God, I didn't believe you. You didn't know," I said again. "I never told you." He pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked down at the ribbons on my chest, at the silver star. He reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched it with one finger. "This is real," he said. Not a question, a realization. "Yeah, all of it." "Yeah." He swallowed hard, looked me in the eye. "I owe you more than an apology." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You earned that promotion. You did that on your own. But I wouldn't be here without you." His voice was steady now, stronger. General Hargrove said it. "I come from good stock. I didn't see it. You see it now," I said. He nodded. Then he straightened up, wiped his face one more time, and held out his hand. I took it. We shook, firm, strong, the way men do when words aren't enough. And somewhere in that handshake, something shifted. Something that had been broken for a long time started to heal. It took a general to open his eyes, but it took a father to forgive him. Hargrove found us 20 minutes later in the lobby. He'd changed out of his formal jacket into just the service dress shirt, ribbons still pinned above the pocket. He looked more relaxed, but his eyes still had that sharp, focused quality that good officers never lose. "Sarge," he said, walking up to us, "you got plans for lunch?" "Nothing that can't wait, sir." "Good. I owe you a beer. Been owing you one for 56 years. He looked at Daniel. "Major Riley, you're welcome to join us. If you want to hear some real stories about your old man." Daniel nodded. "I'd like that, sir." We walked across the base to the officers' club, a low brick building with a patio overlooking the flight line. Hargrove led us inside to a corner booth away from the main crowd. The place was half full, mostly officers grabbing lunch between meetings. Hargrove ordered 3 beers. Coors. Cold. Nothing fancy. When they arrived, he raised his glass. "To the man who taught me what leadership really means," he said, looking at me, "and to the son who's going to carry that legacy forward." We clinked glasses and drank. The beer was cold and bitter and perfect. Hargrove set his glass down and leaned back in the booth. "So, Sarge, what have you been doing for the last 50 years? I shrugged. "Not much. Came home in 72, bought a house, worked construction for a while, then maintenance at the hospital, raised a boy, got old. Sounds like a good life." "It was quiet," I said. "That's what I wanted." Daniel was sitting next to me, silent, listening. His eyes moved between Hargrove and me like he was seeing both of us for the first time. Hargrove smiled. "You know, I looked for you. After I got out of the hospital, I asked around, tried to track you down. But by the time I got back to Vietnam, your unit had already rotated stateside, and nobody knew where you'd gone." "I went home," I said. "Didn't look back much." "I understand that." Hargrove took another drink. "I thought about you, though. A lot. Wondered if you made it. I wondered if you had a family, if you were okay." "I made it," I said. "And yeah, I'm okay." Hargrove looked at Daniel. "Your father carried me 3 miles through hell, Major. You know what that takes? Not just strength, not just courage, stubbornness, pure pig-headed refusal to quit." Daniel nodded slowly. "I was barely conscious," Hargrove continued, "but I remember pieces. I remember him telling me to shut up when I told him to leave me. I remember the sound of his boots in the mud. I remember thinking, this crazy bastard is actually going to get us both killed." He smiled. "But he didn't. He got us both out. And when I woke up in the field hospital 3 days later, I asked the nurse where the sergeant was who brought me in. She said he'd already gone back to his unit." Hargrove looked at me. "Didn't even stick around for a thank you." "I didn't need one," I said. "Well, you're getting one now." He raised his glass again. "Thank you, Sarge. For my life, for my career, for everything." We drank. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice soft. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Dad?" I looked at him. "Because I didn't think you needed to know. You were going to be an officer. Clean, educated, professional. I didn't want to weigh you down with my mud. It wouldn't have been weight," Daniel said. "It would have been pride." The beer tasted like 1969, but the company finally felt like a family. We left the officers' club around 2 in the afternoon. Hargrove walked us out to the parking lot. He shook Daniel's hand first, congratulated him again, told him to take care of his old man. Then he turned to me. "Sarge," he said, "I mean it. Thank you for everything." "You already thanked me, sir." "Not enough." He gripped my hand hard. "You gave me a second chance at life. I didn't waste it." "I can see that," I said. He released my hand, stepped back, and saluted. I returned it, sharp, crisp, the way I was taught. Then he turned and walked back toward the building. Daniel and I stood in the parking lot for a moment, watching him go. "He's a good man," Daniel said. "Always was," I replied. We got into my truck. I started the engine, let it warm up for a minute, then pulled out of the lot and headed toward the main gate. The drive back to the house was quiet, not the uncomfortable silence that had filled the space between us for so long. This was different, comfortable, the kind of quiet that comes when you don't need to fill every second with words. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window at the mountains. His new rank gleamed on his shoulder. The promotion certificate was in a folder on his lap. After about 10 minutes, he spoke. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Yeah. The rest of the stories, the ones you never told me. Would you tell me now?" I glanced over at him. His face was serious, open, not skeptical. not dismissive, just curious. There's a lot to tell, I said. I know. He looked at me. I want to hear it. All of it. The parts you left out because you thought I didn't need to know. I drove for another minute, thinking. Then I nodded. Yeah, I said. I can do that. He smiled. Small, but real. Good. We pulled onto Austin Bluffs Parkway. The house came into view. Old, worn, familiar. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. We sat there for a moment. You know, Daniel said quietly, I had a poster of General Hargrove on my wall when I was a kid. I remember. I should have had a picture of you. I looked at him. You have me now, I said. He nodded. We got out of the truck and walked to the front door. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and Daniel followed. The house was the same. The coffee table where the medals had been, the garage where Daniel had hidden them, the hallway where the uniform had hung for 50 years. But something was different. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of respect, full of understanding, full of something we'd been missing for too long. Daniel set his folder on the counter and turned to me. I'll make coffee, he said, and you can start at the beginning. I hung my cover on the hook by the door and walked to the kitchen. The beginning's a long time ago, I said. We've got time, Daniel replied, and for the first time in years, I believed him. Daniel made the coffee while I changed out of the uniform. It felt good to get the jacket off. My chest expanded with the first real breath I'd taken in hours. I hung everything carefully in the closet, smoothed out the wrinkles, and pulled on a flannel shirt and jeans. When I came back to the kitchen, Daniel was sitting at the table with 2 mugs, steam rising, the folder with his promotion certificate sitting next to him. We drank in silence for a few minutes. Then Daniel set his mug down and looked at me. Dad, where did you put the box? After I hid it? I got it back, I said. Night before the ceremony. He nodded slowly. Can I see it? The real thing. I mean, not just from across the room. I stood and walked to the bedroom. The cigar box was on the dresser where I'd left it that morning. I brought it back to the kitchen and set it on the table between us. Daniel reached out, hesitated, then opened the lid. He looked at the medals for a long time, picked up the silver star, turned it over in his hands, read the inscription on the back, set it down gently, did the same with the bronze star, the Purple Heart, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. These should be displayed, he said finally, not hidden in a cigar box. They've been fine where they were, I said. No, he looked up at me. They haven't, and I'm the reason they stayed hidden. He pulled out his phone, started typing. A minute later, he turned the screen toward me. Shadow boxes, proper military display cases, wood frame, glass front, velvet backing. They make them specifically for medals and ribbons. I looked at the screen. The cases were nice, professional, the kind of thing you'd see in a museum or a veteran's home. Those are expensive, I said. I don't care. His voice was firm. I'm buying one. You're not arguing. I started to protest, then stopped. This wasn't about the money. This was about something else. Okay, I said. He ordered it right there at the kitchen table. Express shipping. It will arrive in 3 days. When he finished, he closed the cigar box and pushed it gently toward me. I'm sorry, Dad, for hiding these, for not believing you, for treating your service like it was something to be ashamed of. You didn't know, I said again. I should have trusted you. He met my eyes. You're my father. I should have given you that. I reached across the table and put my hand on his shoulder. You're giving it to me now, I said. That's what matters. 3 days later, the shadow box arrived. Daniel came over that evening to help me set it up. We laid the medals out on the kitchen table, arranged them according to regulation, the way they'd been pinned to my uniform. Bronze star and silver star on top, Purple Heart below, service ribbons and commendations filling in the rest. Daniel's hands were steady as he placed each one in the velvet-lined case. He adjusted them carefully, making sure everything was centered, aligned, and perfect. When he was done, he stepped back and looked at it. That's how it should be, he said. We carried it to the living room, found a spot on the wall opposite the front door, the first thing anyone would see when they walked in. Daniel got the drill and level from the garage, made sure the mounting was solid. When the case was hung, We both stood back and looked at it. The metals gleamed behind the glass. The ribbons were bright against the dark blue velvet. The brass nameplate at the bottom read, Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Riley, USMC. That's your legacy, Dad, Daniel said quietly. I looked at the case, at the evidence of things I'd tried to forget for 50 years. No, I said, you're my legacy. The metals are just metal. He put his arm around my shoulders. Then let's call it our history, he said, and that felt right. We took the history out of the darkness and hung it in the light. That night, after Daniel left, I sat in my recliner and looked at the shadow box on the wall. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes late in the evening when the world settles down and you're left alone with your thoughts. I've been thinking a lot lately about what I'd tell my younger self, the 22-year-old sergeant in the jungle, the 44-year-old new father holding a baby boy, the 50-year-old widower is trying to raise a son alone. If I could go back, I'd tell that man, don't let the silence become a wall. I thought I was protecting Daniel by staying quiet about the war, though I was giving him a clean slate, a fresh start, a life unburdened by my mud and blood and ghosts. But silence doesn't protect. It isolates. It creates distance where there should be connection. It makes your children think you have nothing worth knowing. It turns your service, your sacrifice, into something invisible, something that doesn't matter. I'd tell my younger self, your story is their inheritance, not the medals, not the ribbons, the story, the choices you made, the reasons you made them, the moments that defined you and the moments you survived. Those things aren't a burden, they're a foundation. If I'd told Daniel earlier, really told him, not just the sanitized versions I let slip during holidays, maybe he would have understood sooner. Maybe he wouldn't have needed a general to confirm what I'd been too proud or too quiet to say to myself. A medal in a box is just metal, cold, silent, meaningless without context. But a medal with a story? That's a legacy. That's something a son can hold on to. Something he can learn from. Something he can pass to his own children someday. I stayed quiet for 50 years because I thought humility meant silence. I was wrong. Humility means not bragging, not making yourself the hero of every story, not turning your service into a weapon to win arguments or demand respect. But humility doesn't mean hiding. It doesn't mean letting your children think you were nothing. It doesn't mean putting your proof of service behind paint cans in the garage. If you're reading this, if you're a father or a grandfather with your own box of medals, your own stories you've kept quiet, don't make my mistake. Tell them, not because you want glory, not because you need validation. Tell them because they deserve to know where they come from. They deserve to understand the man who raised them. They deserve to inherit not just your name, but your history. Don't wait for a stranger to confirm your story. Don't wait for a general to walk into a ceremony and say the things you should have said years ago. Tell them yourself, while you still can, while they're still listening, before the silence becomes permanent. It's been 3 months since the ceremony. The shadow box is still on the wall in my living room. Every time I walk past it, I stop for just a second. Not out of pride, though I won't lie and say there isn't some of that, but more out of relief. Relief that it's not hidden anymore. Relief that my son knows. Relief that the silence is broken. Daniel comes over more often now, usually on Sunday afternoons. He brings lunch, sandwiches from the deli near the base, sometimes pizza, and we sit at the kitchen table and talk, really talk. Not the surface-level conversations we used to have, not the how's work and weather's nice small talk that filled the space between us for years. Now we talk about the hard things, the real things. He asks questions. I answer them. Sometimes the answers are longer than they should be, and I catch myself rambling. But Daniel never stops me. He listens, takes it in, asks follow-up questions that tell me he's really hearing what I'm saying. Last week he asked about the Purple Heart, how I got it, what happened. I told him about the ambush outside Da Nang, the rocket that exploded 10 feet from where I was standing, the shrapnel that tore through my shoulder and side, the corpsman who patched me up in the field while we were still taking fire. He didn't look away, didn't change the subject. just listened. When I finished, he said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. Not thank you for your service, though I've heard that enough times to know it's well-meaning. Just, I'm sorry." And somehow, that meant more. General Hargrove called a few weeks ago, just to check in, he said. We talked for an hour, traded stories, filled in the gaps from the last 56 years. He's retired now, living in Florida, spending time with his grandkids. Before he hung up, he said something I won't forget. "You saved more than my life that day, Sarge. You gave me 50 years I wouldn't have had. A wife, 3 kids, 6 grandchildren, a career I'm proud of. Every good thing I've done since 1969 happened because you refused to leave me behind." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, "You would have done the same." "Maybe," he said, "but I didn't have to. You did." We left it at that. I'm 78 years old. I know I don't have 50 years left. Probably don't have 20, maybe not even 10. But however long I've got, I'm going to spend it making sure Daniel knows who I am. Not just the father who raised him. Not just the old man who lives in the house on Austin Bluffs Parkway, but the man I was before he knew me. The sergeant who carried a lieutenant through the jungle. The Marine who earned every ribbon in that shadow box. The man who came home quiet, not because he had nothing to say, but because he didn't know how to say it. I'm at peace now, for the first time in a long time. Not because Daniel apologized, though that helped. Not because Hargrove recognized me, though that healed something I didn't know was still broken. I'm at peace, because the truth is out, because the silence is gone, because my son looks at me now and sees the man I actually was, not the man he imagined. The shadow box is on the wall, the medals are in the light, the stories are being told, and my son knows who I am. My name is Thomas Riley. I'm 78 years old. I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I'm a United States Marine. Always have been, always will be. If you've made it this far, do me one last favor. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and tell me, do you have stories you've been keeping quiet? Medals in a box? Service you've never talked about? Don't wait for a general to tell your family who you are. Tell them yourself while you still can. And if this story meant something to you, share it with your father, your grandfather, your son, the men in your life who served and stayed silent. Let them know it's okay to speak now. Semper Fi.